Welcome back, friends. Today we're drawing and painting a catbird. This sweet bird has soft gray feathers, and I really love the pose in this image that I found on Pixabay. You won't need very many colors for this project. I'll just be using Daniel Smith Indigo, that's this dark blue here, ultramarine blue, and burnt sienna. If you have them on a palette like I do, you can go ahead and spray them just to activate the paints ahead of time and get them ready to go. My brush today is my Silver Black Velvet size 4 round brush. I have a pencil, a water jar, and a paper towel for blotting, and it might be helpful to have a large eraser on hand for when you're doing your sketch. Because we're down to the last 3 birds in this series, I've done rough outlines of each one just to make sure that they're in the right place and I don't accidentally enlarge any. I wanted to make sure that where I placed him, he didn't have the flower above him looking like a crown. I lowered him just a little bit and moved him slightly to the right so that it wouldn't look like he was crowned by this coneflower here. All right, so let's go ahead and tighten up the sketch. I've already done a half moon shape capturing the movement of the belly and the turning of the neck. So once you've got your placement, this is your opportunity to really tighten up your drawing and make sure that it's ready for painting. I like to start with the head because that is the focal point. So I'm going to do the beak first with a fairly dark marking once I'm confident with the placement. And then there's a little nostril right here, the top of the beak, and a marking coming down. Now as you draw the neck, look at how far apart this shape or the base of the beak is from the top wing. Judge that distance and then sketch accordingly. The top of the head, just a nice curved shape. And the eye is pretty much right in the center of the space between the beak and the back of the head. Important things to note in your sketch are going to be highlights, especially because those are areas you want to avoid with paint. So the highlights in the eyes are something I pretty much always sketch ahead of time. That way I really know to watch for them when I go in with my paint. And you can sketch the top of the beak even though it's going to be in the highlighted area, quite light in value. I've noticed in the reference photo too, there's a few little whiskers almost. I wonder if that is where the catbird gets its name. Something I'll have to look up. I really don't know too much about birds. It's definitely something I'd like to know more about. Then we'll do a little bit of ruffling of the feathers here on the underside of the belly. And it curves all the way up and connects to this wing. If you feel intimidated by all of these linear shapes of the feathers, don't be. Just notice where some of the feathers cross each other. Like you see this almost vertical line here where the feathers are separated, and then just indicate any major lines and sort of eyeball them. They don't have to be perfect. Just a couple lines to suggest the feathers is really all you need. We're not going for photographic realism here. And then the tail, look at the space between here and the base of the tail. I made my initial mark a little too high, so I'm going to go a bit lower. And I think that's a little more accurate. And then you've got the feet coming down directly next to the belly here at an angle. So check out the angle of those feet. Coming almost to the bottom of your paper. This is a fairly simple bird compared to the other ones just because there's not a lot of color variation. It's just gray. But I just love the pose and I think it's so sweet. And that's pretty much it for the sketch. If you want to include this little curved shape where the head and neck are turning, you can do that. But I think we're ready to start painting. So as I mentioned before, this is going to be a lot of gray. There are a number of different ways to mix grays. One of my favorite combinations for gray is ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. So let's start with that. Let's go ahead and mix up our gray first using burnt sienna and ultramarine. Pretty much a 50-50 mixture of the two. If it's looking a little too brown, just add some more blue. And if it's looking a little too blue, add more brown. And once you have a pretty much half and half ratio of the two, you should get a beautiful neutral gray. Yes, so I think that's pretty good. Now, if you'd like, you can set that aside, grab a different brush if you have one. If not, don't worry, you can use the same one. And start with wet and wet. So color in the entire bird with clean water. And I just realized I want to make sure that I have a lost edge just like the other birds have. So I'm going to erase a couple little spots on the bird for lost edges. So again, go in with your water, paint the whole inside of the bird's body, everywhere that it's gray, which is pretty much the whole bird. You can avoid the legs for now. And if you want, you can see in the reference photo the tail is a little bit blurry because of the camera focus. It's out of focus here, so I'm just going to extend the water beyond even the outside dimensions of the tail. That will encourage the paint to soften a little bit more beyond our pencil marks, creating the look of a fuzzy, blurred out effect. Okay, so if you want also to extend your water a little bit beyond the pencil line on the belly, that will also make sure that it's softened. No puddles though, make sure it's just glossy wet, not too wet, just a glistening surface ready for paint. Now your brush should still be loaded with paint if you used a separate brush to mix up your gray. So go ahead and start painting in your gray. You can flatten out the brush a little bit more to release more paint. And where you want less paint to be released, like in lighter areas of the bird's body, use more of a feathering motion of the brush. Right here I can see that it's turning towards the light, it's lighter in value, so I'm not pressing as hard. You can push and pull the wet paint quite a bit while it's still wet. Take advantage of this time to get down lots of color quickly without having to worry about edges. That's the beauty of wet and wet. Just don't have to worry about any hard edges forming. Except where the water ends. Wherever the water stops, that's where an edge will form. So keep that in mind when wetting certain areas. So I'm painting pretty much right up to the edge of the pencil lines. And I think that's just a lovely gray, perfect base color for a bird. Super soft. You can even paint in the bottom part of the beak and the tail, of course. Now I waited for the tail till the very end because it is going to soften out a little bit. Remember, we extended our water outside of our pencil lines, so you can see it's blurring out, and that's the effect we were going for. Now, burnt sienna and ultramarine are both granulating colors, so you'll see some pebbly texture happening on your paper when you use wet and wet with those. Don't be surprised by that. That's just one of the fun features of these particular pigments. So use it and embrace it. If you don't like the granulation, you can always choose colors that are not granulating. In fact, if I use indigo instead of ultramarine, indigo is a non-granulating color, I can choose to make that my gray instead. It's a little more blue. You could just introduce a little hint of brown, and this won't granulate quite as much. Now, I've mixed up a dark color with my indigo and a tiny hint of brown. And now I'm going to start darkening up the shadow tones on the belly of the bird. The paper's still wet. It's still going to soften out a little bit. So just be aware of that. Don't be surprised when it starts to expand. Another important thing is when you're working on wet paper, wet paint, you have to watch out that you don't have too much water in your brush or it will shove aside the paint that's already there, causing unwanted effects. Blossoms and blooms. I'm not really going for that. I'm going to mix in a little more brown with my combination here. In the reference photo I see warmer colors underneath the head. So more brown creates a warmer tone. And as it's beginning to dry, I can paint a little more cautiously with a little more detail. And the paint will stay put where I lay it down. It might soften out a little bit because it is still damp, but it's softening out less than it did initially. On the top of the head, we see a really dark black patch of feathers. So I'm going to paint that in. Being careful because this is really drawing an important edge. You can also begin to paint details like the eyes and the beak. I'm using pretty much pure indigo for that. I'm going to be so careful to try to make sure my brush is at a nice fine point and paint around the highlight in the eye. Remember, we were careful to sketch that on. And this is so tiny, but just do your best. If you lose the highlight, you can always paint over it with a white opaque paint or a gel pen even to restore the highlight. And then I'm going to paint a tiny little rim underneath the eye. A common feature of a bird's eye is this little rim all the way around it catching the light. And you see these circular shapes in the feathers surrounding the eye, coming up towards the beak. So I'm scraping my brush across the surface of the paper, picking up the texture of the paper, creating the effect of fuzzy feathers. And then painting in the nostril. Grab some more paint as needed. The whole lower portion of the beak is in shadow. It's pretty much pitch black. So go your darkest here. Painting that all in super dark. And another little rim of feather texture right here. Just looking carefully and observing my reference photo for these little details. Pretty much everything is dried enough that we could go over it with some more texture. For now though, I want to address the wing right here. Let's take our ultramarine mixture again. I still have indigo in my brush, so now I'm mixing it in with that ultramarine gray, ultramarine burnt sienna gray, and a little bit of water. I'm going to go over the wing again. So we're going to end up with a darker value. I'm going to come right up to where there's this separation in the wing feathers and stop there because this area of the wing is lighter. I'm going to rinse out some of that, and then with the lighter value that's in my brush, paint the top of the wing. We have to make small value adjustments all the time when we're working with watercolor, and this is so easily done by dipping in the water, removing some on the paper towel, and then going back into your painting with the lighter value that's now in your brush. So this lower portion of the wing is slightly lighter. That's why I didn't want to use that dark color on it. Painting more specific details with the tip of the wing. All right, now I'm going to grab some more dark paint and paint a shadow on the underside of the tail feather. That ended up making it look like a hard edge after we spent all that work with the softening, but I still like the way the paint flowed outward a little bit, so it doesn't bother me. I'm going to leave it like that, I think. All right, so coming back to the head, there are some areas that need to be darkened up, but not dramatically. We have to be subtle here. So I'm going to take a wash, a tinted wash of my ultramarine burnt sienna combination, and oops, too much water. I'm going to remove that on the paper towel. Just cover the front of the face right here, leaving a lighter area just above it. And then surrounding the eye with this tinted wash. Dipping in the water again. And with a more subtle darkening, adding a layer right here. And then I want to reinforce this crease in the feathers where the neck is turning. So a light gray dabbing motion right there is helping that look more effective. And then one more time, I'm going to wet the belly with the light tinted wash of gray that's on my brush. I'm going to let that dry for a little bit because what I'm going to go for here is a soft feathering effect, but I don't want it to be completely blown out and lost wet and wet. So I need to let it dry slightly, and then when I add some damp paint over the top, it should soften in a subtle way, still kind of stay put, so a medium drying time here. While that's drying a little bit, I'm going to take my indigo and paint these little legs. Just straight indigo is all you need. A couple of little brush strokes indicating the shape of the legs and feet. Nothing too detailed here. Curving of the claws. If you want, you can leave a tiny highlight where you see the light hitting the base of the foot here. And then while you still have that dark paint on your brush, darken under the wing and paint the creases, the shadow tones between the feathers. Just using quick angled brush strokes side by side. Do your best to keep them parallel and leave little gaps in between, showing the highlighted separation between the feathers. All right, I'm going to rinse some of that out, dry on my paper towel, and with the paint that's still in my brush, I'm going to darken under the belly. And now this has dried enough that I can paint the belly with this extra layer of indigo while scraping my brush across the surface, moving my brush in the direction that the feathers are turning, which is sort of in the same movement of the belly, the circular half moon shape. Now I'm going to spread out the bristles of my brush while dipping it in the gray and lightly slide my brush across the belly in a half moon shape. The bristles should be catching on the texture of the paper, leaving little gaps and allowing for some texture and the look of soft fuzzy feathers. That's what we're going for here. And if it's catching on the paper too much, just gently dip the tip of your brush in the water without removing all the paint, just to get it flowing again. I'm going to add just a little more color to the head, really help it stand out here. Okay, this one lost edge, it's created a weird shape here, so I'm going to remove that by dipping my clean brush in water and then gently scrubbing. You might need to let some water soak in there first, but a little gentle scrubbing motion should remove that strange shape that happened there, and that looks better, I think. One more thing you can do, if you ended up with a little too much texture, it almost looks like long fur or something, just take your brush, dip it in water, grab a little bit of gray, and then just go over it again with a light wash. This will help soften out all that texture without removing it completely. Burnt sienna and ultramarine reactivate really easily and lift really easily, so you can push and pull the paint a lot using a wet brush. Yes, and I think that looks a little smoother, a little more uniform. I'm going to take a little more indigo. I'm going to take some indigo in my brush and just darken under the belly again. All of these are very subtle little shifts in value. And you can see we didn't use brown a whole lot. It's just very gray. But I think that's it. There we go. I'm pretty happy with that. I might just add one tiny bit of gray to the top of the beak. Hardly any color, just a light wash. And then once this is all dry, we can erase any additional pencil markings that are somewhat distracting. The last thing is to add a little bit of spatter. I actually didn't add any to my goldfinch either, so it might be a chance for me to do that now. I'm going to be using transparent orange, which is the color you see here. Soak your brush in lots of water, grab lots of paint. If you have lots of water in your brush, that will mean that your spatter will be a little lighter. And if you have more pigment, obviously your spatter will be darker. I prefer kind of this watery consistency on my brush. It makes it really easy for the paint to release from my brush when I tap. So I'm just going to take my fingers and gently tap anywhere that you want this effect. I'm going to put some over here on top of the goldfinch too. And then I'm going to add some more manual circles using my watered down transparent orange. So fun and whimsical. And as a final detail, if you wish, you can add a branch or something underneath the bird's feet. To help balance out the composition, I'm going to leave this area alone and just extend a suggestion of a branch or a board, whatever it is he's sitting on, off to the left a little bit, kind of curving upward. It doesn't need much, just a subtle hint of the ground beneath the bird. All right, I'll let you guys take a look at what we've got so far. There are just 2 birds left in this series. This one was so much fun. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Sometimes it's really fun just to work with a limited palette. We only used blues and browns today, so keeping it simple. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.